and thank you for joining us for this episode of the Health Essentials Podcast. I'm your host, Annie Zaleski, and today we're talking with pediatrician Noah Schwartz about kids and screen time. From a very young age, your kids have probably begged to play with your phone or tablet or watch their favorite movies on TV. As they grow older, maybe they've received devices of their own or started playing online games with friends. During the pandemic, many students also started attending virtual school on their computer. Unsurprisingly, all this activity adds up to a lot of screen time. Dr. Schwartz is here to discuss whether screen time is bad for kids, how much screen time kids should be having, and how and when to introduce screen time limits. Dr. Schwartz, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
So first off, tell everyone, what is your role at the Cleveland Clinic?
So I'm a general pediatrician. I see kids from the first newborn visit all the way to late adolescence / early adulthood for well visits, sick visits, and everything in between.
Excellent. Very nice. So today we're talking about screen time. So let's start off by, what is considered screen time?
So anything with a screen is screen time. I mean, that includes your TV, that includes your phone, the tablet, the computer. There's no specific thing that is included in screen time or isn't. And it's just about a child or anybody, even an adult, just looking at screen time. What we're doing right now technically is screen time.
Wow. So, but there are all those different types then. But so when you're measuring screen time, is watching TV the same as chatting, kind of like what we're doing via online now? Or is it the same as playing a game on a laptop? In other words, are all forms of screen time created equal?
So yes and no. I mean, for the most part, they're not, right? So and the studies have been pretty clear. Video chatting, meetings, interacting with people via screens is very different than just sort of sitting and watching something. So, talking to grandparents on FaceTime or doing something else like a meeting or school on Zoom is totally different than watching TV, playing video games, or doing some sort of app on your phone. Very different.
That goes right into my next question then, how like kids, playing or chatting online kind of fits into screen time then, why is it so different?
Well, especially with younger kids, they need back and forth interaction. Little kids under the age of 2 really don't get a lot of benefit from screen time just watching TV because at that stage in their life, from a developmental standpoint, it's all about watching their environment, learning, understanding, hearing things back towards them once they get, when they do something, hearing someone repeat back to them. And so looking for that, responsive emotional connection is not really there in the TV, when you're watching a TV show or playing a video game necessarily.
That's really interesting. So if someone though, you're getting that interaction, if they're that young, through, video chatting, does that actually happen then, or does it need to be kind of that in person?
So obviously, in person, face to face, when you can play off of someone's subtle cues is totally better than doing things over a video. But in today's world, even before the pandemic, people are spread out all sorts of places. They're away from family. And so having that ability to connect, even if it's not physical or in person, is still super important. And it can be helpful. I mean, it's better than just mindlessly watching something.
So I think, kind of what you described there is why, especially during the pandemic in the last couple of years, kids have been on devices more because they're kind of looking for that then. So does group virtual play, like maybe with games, fall under kind of the same, category as screen time?
I mean, it's all screen time. But not all screen times are created equal, and that, like we said before. And so certainly it's better than nothing. And in the beginning of the pandemic, when there was no school and there was everything was closed, for the kids to have those interactions online, to look at and see their friends, to talk to people, is clearly beneficial, and it's better than nothing. I know that there have been a lot of studies, even in adults, that have been done over the pandemic, that have shown that people's loneliness was a lot better too, because over the pandemic we were all connected, and so you weren't just sitting at home alone, but you were able to sort of talk to people, and if anything, we were more eager to connect to other people online, and it did help with making people feel a little more happy, making people feel less lonely in the adult population, and it makes sense that would apply to kids too, especially if they're away from their peers and not in school all the time.
Well, I think, just kind of having that connection and maybe not being as lonely is one reason why kids gravitate towards screen time. What
Yeah.
are some other reasons why kids really enjoy that so much?
It's the same reason why we enjoy it. It's addictive. It's designed to stimulate you and to draw you in and to keep you watching, because that's ultimately how that system works. Is the more views that they get, the more revenue is generated. And so screen time, when you're talking about TV, video games, and apps, is designed to keep you in. And so for kids, it's flashy, it's bright, it's colorful. It's the music and the sounds that they love, and so why wouldn't they want to watch it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So when kids are having the screen time, does that have a physical impact on kids?
I think it can have a physical impact in a lot of different ways. Certainly if kids are watching screen time for a long time, they'll be more sedentary. They won't be moving as much, so less physical activity and exercise. Um, we know that screen time affects sleep in a big way. There's been a lot of studies showing that screen time can affect children's academics. Depending on how deep you go, there's a lot of different areas where screen time can really affect kids physically and emotionally as well.
Well, that's what I was going to ask is, what are kind of the emotional and maybe even mental health aspects, on screen time on kids?
Yeah, so there have been a lot of studies, connecting higher rates of screen time to decreased mood in teenagers. In little kids, like we talked about developmentally, when you think about their emotional ability, they can't really communicate well. They can't tell you what they want and what they don't want, and so screen time doesn't teach them those cues of how to communicate, because they're just watching something. They're not watching how you react to, how does my parent react when I do this? How does my caregiver react when this happens? And they miss that, and I think that affects their emotional intelligence and how they learn to adapt in a changing world.
Wow. Have doctors kind of put together kind of recommended screen time limits for kids of varying ages? What are sort of what's sort of the prevailing wisdom at the moment about that?
Yeah, so the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends minimal to no screen time in children under the age of 18 months. Kids between 18 and 24 months, it's really minimal. And if you do watch it, it should be, age appropriate and something that you do with them. As you go up, the allowance, so to speak, gets a little bit more. So kids 2 to 5, it's maybe less than an hour. But the important thing that sort of travels through their recommendations is that the screen time is always age appropriate. As involved as you can be when you're watching it, and explaining it to them or talking about it with them is the biggest thing. And then as you get closer to your younger kids, to your adolescents, it's all about sort of preemptively setting boundaries and setting limits, so that screen time is not the thing that they do all day and every day.
Well, that's something we're definitely going to get into later because I think a lot of parents will, that's very familiar to a lot of parents with,
Yeah,
especially in the last couple of years.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so are there signs that if your child is having too much screen time, like how can you tell if they're just too much, too much computer time, maybe too much TV time?
Yeah, I don't, not always, right? It's not like every kid that watches a lot of screen time has a specific symptom. I think one thing that parents need to do is sometimes if you're thinking about the problem, take a step back and say, okay, like, let me think about how many hours a day my child watches TV. And if you realize, wow, that's a lot, that's a first step. Certainly, like we said before, excessive screen time can have other effects on kids. So, there's been studies showing it has decreased cognitive function, decreased attention, changes their energy. They're just glued to the screen all the time. I think it's just things that you see. Some kids do complain. We see kids complaining of headaches or other physical complaints. And then when we talk to them in the office, it's like, oh yeah, you're spending 50% of your day on a screen, whether it's your phone or TV or computer. That might be part of the problem. But I wouldn't say that there's one specific, symptom that would stick out for each child.
I'm glad you mentioned headaches because I think that's one of the things that, comes up sometimes.
Yeah.
Can dizziness and even seizures also be symptoms of potentially too much screen time?
I'm not so sure about seizures or dizziness. I think headaches makes a lot of sense. There's been a lot of talk about blue light and how that affects vision and things like that, and just giving your eyes a rest is really important. And just that strain of staring at something, whether you're too close to it or not, I think can certainly make you not feel great. And it probably not moving a lot too, if you're not active as much, not going outside, getting enough sunlight, will make you not feel good as well. And so that can kind of tie into this.
So a lot of it is just all interrelated then, it's kind of
Yeah.
a snowball effect in a
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest areas, especially with kids, that we've seen screen time affect them is with sleep. Sleep is so important to growing children, but like we said before, screens are constant stimulation, and so there's been a lot of good studies about how screen time close to bed really affects kids. It stimulates you, and so when you're in bed watching your phone or looking at videos, your brain is chugging along, processing all that stimulation. And it wants to keep going. And, these things are designed to nonstop. When you watch YouTube, it just rolls right to the next video. And so we find that some kids are just locked into their phone for hours, even though they're in their bed. And there's another, and that also affects their sleep hygiene, because then your brain associates your bed with phone and screen time. And every time you sit in your bed, your brain's like, where's my phone? Let's go. Let's get it out. And it happens. And it's really hard to break that habit as well.
I think a lot of adults will find that scenario very familiar as well. I know that that's a very common thing that adults also mention.
Yeah. And there's been some studies about how blue light can affect your body's circadian rhythm, that sort of helps you control when your body gets sleepy, and your melatonin release. I heard about an interesting study that came out recently, that checked in adults, that sort of monitored people with exposed to light when they went to sleep, and people that went to sleep in a dark room, or people that had the light on all night. And people that slept with the light on had a harder time controlling their blood sugars the next day. I know, there's a lot of variables, and I can't say what caused what, but certainly there's a lot of research going into that. How strongly does it affect when you have lights on in the room, when the screen's on, what that really does to your body, from a health standpoint. And I think that's a very important area, especially for kids.
So, kind of does having that excess screen time, does that affect kids differently depending on their age? Like, would an older child, maybe have different symptoms or be more affected rather than a younger child, or vice versa?
Yeah, so and it's all about development, right? So younger children, like we said before, they can't communicate, and so if they're having trouble, if they're having a hard time expressing themselves, that may be more tantruming. Sometimes when you try to take away the screen time in younger kids, they're getting more upset because they can't tell you what it is that they want, and they get frustrated about that. In older kids, we've certainly seen more depression, and things like that. In the last few months, there was that story of the information leak from Instagram about how they had information knowing that their product was negatively affecting especially teenage girls. So we know that screen time can be very harmful, but it can be also very beneficial. And so it's really all about finding a balance, and working with each kid to sort of make sure we address their needs specifically.
Well, I think that brings up, like we kind of mentioned before, that during the pandemic, kids may have increased screen time because they've been doing virtual
Yeah.
schooling and then staying home.
Yeah.
Should parents have extra concerns about how much more screen time their kids have been getting overall?
Yeah, I mean, so it depends, right? I mean, if kids are doing virtual school, what choice do you have? I mean, it's important. We got to educate our kids, but then that increases the importance to sort of provide them with, like, unplugged activities to sort of offset that increased screen time, because that's intensive, that's learning, and that's discussions. It's not as, they still may need a little bit of that, just sort of watching TV, taking a break kind of thing, but all the more so they need more time off, perhaps.
And that makes sense because school can be also very intense and you're, trying to pay
Yeah,
attention to
yeah,
something and learn. And
yeah.
that's a very different thing than maybe you're hanging out with your friends or you both are playing video games, across your
Right.
camera.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, when kids are kind of socializing then, and online, is it better than sort of, socially, if they're online playing games, is it better if they're also kind of communicating maybe with voice or text back and forth? Is it better than maybe if they're just kind of hanging out gaming alone?
I think so. I think there was a study that came out in the pandemic that showed that increased virtual interactions was associated with better mental health, and like we said before, less loneliness. And so the more connected that you can be when you're doing any of this stuff, I think is better no matter what.
That makes a lot of sense then, why I think a lot of parents turn to, virtual play when, maybe kids couldn't get
Yeah,
together in person. So
yeah.
you could still get a little bit of that benefit seeing your friends and hanging out, but yet it's just a little bit different.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, having done a lot of this with my own
Yeah.
kids, like they were definitely excited to jump on their Zoom, class meetings. But at the same time, I mean, you miss all that personal stuff, engaging, sharing, playing with other kids, touching things. The subtle social cues are, I think, are what's really missing. But certainly these virtual connections are better than no connection at all, and I think that's hands down, the way it has to be.
And I think that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah,
It's on a continuum. And
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
So, you mentioned limits earlier in our conversation, and I think
yeah.
that's probably one of the biggest conversations a lot of parents have then, so how do you know it's time that you need to have that talk with your child to cut down on their screen time?
Yeah, so similar to like we said before, I think if you take a step back and sort of think about how much time your kid or your whole family or even yourself are spending watching TV or on your screen, and then sort of trying to start from that point is the way to go. If certainly if there's problematic issues like issues at school or things like that, and then it becomes like, oh yeah, they're on their computer all the time, and that's why they're not doing their homework or whatever the reason is. That's your starting point. I mean, typically it starts from day one when the kids are babies, but a lot of times we're jumping into this in the middle, and we're trying to sort of navigate our way out of it.
So, what are some best practices or effective things that parents can do to kind of help their kids limit or cut down on screen time?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, it's lead by example. If your kids see you on your phone, then they're going to be on their phone, right? If you're at the dinner table and you're scrolling through and you're looking at stuff, they're watching you. Kids are sponges and they're absorbing their environment. And so, they follow what they see. And so if in the house everyone's on the phone and the TV's on and things like that, that's all that they're going to know. So starting with your own practices, I think is a great way to begin. A lot of the recommendations, especially from the American Academy of Pediatrics, and try to recommend co-watching. So as much as possible, being a part of your child's screen time. So especially when you have little kids, around the age of 2, being involved, talking to them, explaining things to them, trying to watch certain shows with them so that you can teach and things like that is the way to go. And even as an adult, when your kids are as a teenager, when your kids are bigger, watching as a family, making it more of a family time thing, I think is a great strategy. Having designated no screen time. We don't have screen time at the dinner table. We don't have screen time for X period of time in the day. I would recommend definitely no screen time at least an hour before bed for all the reasons like we said before. And then either maybe having no screen zones and then, sticking to the limits, right? Kids will test you, adults will test you too, but if you're going to set a boundary, you better hold that boundary pretty firmly.
Gosh, I mean, that's all such great advice, but as we all know that, even the best laid plans, kids will test those and
Yeah.
kids will, be very, even sneaky
Yeah.
sometimes,
Yeah.
try to get their
Yeah.
phone.
Yeah.
What can parents do, when they're dealing with, maybe some kids who are really resistant to cutting down on screen time or kind of bending or breaking, no screen time rules households might have?
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, consistency is the only thing you can do, right? One, if and this happens with anything with children. I mean, if they realize that they do X behavior and they get this result, they will continue to do that. And so, every once in a while, nothing's going to be perfect, and you're going to have days where you need to do something, and the rules will be broken. But I think just sticking to it, being consistent, being firm, if it means taking their phones physically away, hiding them, doing something like that, I think it's important, especially when it comes to sleep and academics and making sure your kids are getting enough exercise and getting outside.
And and parents have to do that, and kids will even do things, they'll maybe even swap out phones. And
Mhm.
so it is, especially nowadays, it's a challenge for a lot
Yeah.
of parents.
Yeah, absolutely. They're pretty crafty.
So what can parents kind of say to kids to help make kids understand why maybe cutting down on screen time is important?
Yeah. It's a tough one. I mean, I think having a conversation with your child in an age appropriate manner is one way to do it. Trying to explain to them why you're doing what you're doing, that you're doing it as a family is one way to do it. I believe that the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, has online resources for families. So there's like a whole form that you can sort of create with your family. Instead of doing screen time, we will do this, and we get to do screen time at this time, and sort of just trying to be honest with them about why you're doing it and how you're going to do it, but trying to make them a partner in the decision, I think is going to be the most effective way.
And I like that then, because if you're reducing screen time, you can say, look, this is not a punishment.
Yeah,
We're all trying to be healthier. We're
yeah,
all trying to be better.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, and there's a lot of things that I think parents can do, even if your kids are going to have screen time, to make sure that that's positive screen time too. So like,
And I think that's really important, to
yeah,
have, that it's, if kids are maybe, geez, on social media, and there might be some
mhm,
bullying going on, or,
yeah,
they're on Instagram, like you
yeah,
mentioned, and maybe they're feeling bad about
yeah,
themselves. It's like there's
yeah.
so many things parents can do.
Yeah. And I think especially with your, older kids, adolescents, teenagers, and honestly, starting from a young age is not a bad idea to discuss with your kids what appropriate behavior on screen time is. Right. We're just what does it mean when you read something online? Whose opinion is that? Where does it come from? Learning to just sort of not necessarily, understand the sources of things on the internet. They need to understand, that cyberbullying exists. Talking to your kid about that, talking to your children about sexting and sharing inappropriate things online is important too, right? What you think you're sharing with your friend may get shared with everybody. And so, you don't share things on the internet that you don't want other people to see, even if you know the person you're sharing it with. And even with a lot of these online chats and a lot of these games that kids are playing, you don't necessarily know who you're talking to. And so it's important for parents to have those conversations with their kids, to let their kids know that they can come to them if they encounter inappropriate behavior, or if there's something they're not comfortable with or that seems dangerous is happening online. I mean, we need that open area of communication so we can stop that.
And and on the same token too, kids also, need to understand, like, if you say something, that could be forever.
Yep.
Everything on the internet lives forever.
Mhm.
So
Don't
if
forget.
if you're mean to someone, that'll get
Mhm.
around at school. And
Yeah.
it's a very complicated, it's
Yeah.
much more complicated today.
Yeah, and so that's why I think starting, encouraging healthy online behavior even in a young age is so important. So having these conversations, setting these limits, teaching your children how to effectively use the internet in a healthy manner is starts from the beginning, and or as soon as you can, to really just make sure that they're being safe.
And I like that it goes hand in hand with screen time
Yeah,
too. It's
yeah,
not like it's a separate thing. Internet safety and screen time are, kind of one and the same.
yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the internet is growing every day, and so we. It's hard as a parent. It's hard as a doctor. I think even the people in the internet are having a hard time sort of keeping up with things, and so it's our job to just try and make sure that we're walking through it with our kids at the same time.
So if, you work on decreasing screen time, do kids bounce back? How soon might you see an improvement after limiting screen time?
Each kid's different. That's I think you'll see eventually, assuming there's no other issues, grades are coming up, they're feeling happier, we're getting outside, we're getting, we're moving more, maybe we're doing things as a family, we're being more social. So those things will come, you'll notice them. But they might take time, and certainly there's going to be a lot of adjustment, especially in the beginning when we first make a shift away from constant screen time to maybe more limited.
And I like that because, every child is different. So,
Yeah.
what how your child is acting, bouncing back from screen time may look different than someone else's child bouncing
Yeah.
back from screen time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when parents ask you, is screen time bad for kids? What is your typical answer?
Just like the answer to most things, it depends. Inherently, no. But too much of anything is usually not good. And right, like we said before, not all types of screen time are created equal. Social interactions, talking to family members or friends over the phone or on FaceTime or video chatting is totally different than just watching TV or playing video games or doing apps on your phone.
So, is there anything else you want to add then? Are there any aspects of screen time we haven't covered that you feel are important to mention?
I think we covered a lot of things. Some other important areas that are important to just sort of remember. Background TV is a big one that I hear about a lot. The kids playing and the TV's on, but they're not watching it, but it's still on and they still know it's on. And so they're growing up in an environment where there's a TV on constantly. And that's going to have an effect on their approach to screen time because, oh, it's always TV time, right? And so if a kid is not watching the TV, don't leave it on. I think that's an important thing. I think there's a lot of things that parents can do to sort of pick the screen time that their kids are watching, right? Before you download an app, look at what the app is. Before you let them watch a movie or a TV show, look at what it is. Make sure that if you have parental controls enabled, that's a good thing to have. Unenabling like the autoplay for the next video so that it's not a constant cycle of videos is important. There's a lot of resources online that can help families choose appropriate screen time. There's something called Common Sense Media, which is a website that parents can look at that rates apps and videos and TV shows and things like that that they can go to. And so it's all about just trying to sort of stay a little bit ahead of the game, preview things, understand, and talk to your kids and be honest about what they're watching and what's going on.
And I think that's such an important point. What's nice is that, their parents do have control over a lot
Yeah.
of these things,
Yeah.
more than maybe they think sometimes.
Yeah. And even if your kids are watching TV or watching a show, talk to them about it. Oh, what did you watch? What happened? What are the things that happened in that show? Or trying to pick, especially for the younger kids, picking more educational based shows is really important. Things like Sesame Street or Daniel Tiger are shows that are meant to sort of engage kids in that sort of 5-ish plus minus year range that are designed to be educational, but also like trying to talk to the kid through the TV. And so you have a lot of control when it comes to screen time, especially with the younger kids. And I think that should not be overlooked.
And that goes back to so much too that all screen time is not created equal.
Yeah.
Kids watching Sesame Street or PBS is much different than maybe they're just coming across a movie and they
Yeah.
just happen to put it on and you
Yeah.
don't know even what it is.
Yeah. And there's some excellent quality programs out there for kids. And so it's important to start with those and lead with that example so that kids are engaged and at least they're getting, they're not watching something that might be harmful for them or something scary.
Are there any other questions that you tend to get from parents about screen time that you want to mention or, misconceptions you want to clear up?
I don't get a lot of, I mean, I see a lot of patients that come to me with concerns that their kids are watching too much screen time. Oftentimes, the area it gets to, especially with the teenagers, is related to sleep, and how it affects their school performance and what we can do to sort of cut down on that. And that's sort of something that has to be done on an individual basis with your doctor to sort of understand what are the other factors. A lot of times it's me observing the families because a lot of people bring the screens everywhere with them and they're in the room. And so when you come to your doctor for their visit, it's often a nice time for us to sort of see a snapshot of maybe how screens are utilized outside of our office. And so that's really beneficial. Sometimes the conversation starts from my end more than the parent's end.
And that's really interesting. And I think I like that point too, that it can be kind of a collaborative process
Yeah.
and that you guys, pediatricians are there to really kind of
Yeah.
help families with these things.
Yeah, and it's a great time for us to sort of demonstrate some methods on how to use screen time. I know a lot of people, when they're in the office and the kids are getting rowdy, use the screen time to help, focus the kids and quiet them down and keep them calm, when in reality, it's more about maybe talking to your kid and letting them learn how to adjust in such a situation, right? If every time your kid gets frustrated or they're having a hard time or they're bored and they start acting out and you give them the phone, that's all they're going to know how to do. But if we start to give them tools and teach them how to behave and how to adjust in those situations, I think that's far more valuable for them.
And that also goes back to really starting early and kind of being very mindful about your actions and being
Yeah.
very mindful about how you react to things.
Yeah, absolutely. Starts from day one.
Well, wonderful. Well, Dr. Schwartz, thank you so much for being here today. This has been really, really interesting, and I think this will help a lot of people.
Yeah, this was fun. It was a pleasure to do.
To learn more, visit clevelandclinicchildrens.org.